start the recording and start letting people in. And then Leanna, I'll let you take over that part. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Before we get started, I'm just going to let a couple more people enter the room. I'm going to put a couple polling questions out there. If you could just answer those for me real quick, and then we will get started in about another minute. Again, if you're just joining us, please go ahead and take a second and complete those polls, and then we will start getting ready here. All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 5th Wasteless Wednesday. Can't believe it's already been 5 weeks of this. I will be your MC for today's event. My name is Bridget Gregory-Trites, and I am the Waste Reduction and Recycling Senior Coordinator at the Johns Hopkins University Homewood campus. For anybody who is new this week, welcome. Each week we're joined by a different sustainability professional to talk about a different topic related to waste. And they will do a short presentation on the topic, and then we will have some time for discussion. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'm going to go over a couple housekeeping things. One, this is being recorded, so if you need to leave for whatever reason, I will email the recording out on Friday. If you'd like, please introduce yourself in the chat box and share your name, what school or organization you're from. We want these events to be social, so please feel free to unmute yourself at any point and ask a question. We just ask that you be courteous, and try not to talk over top of other people. But definitely, especially during like the discussion portion, please feel free to speak out loud if you'd like, or put questions or ideas into the chat box. And to that point, any questions or ideas that are put in the chat box throughout the presentation, Leanna or I will ask our presenter those questions. And if you are having any technical issues during the event, please message me directly in the chat box. So today I am excited because I'm joined by Celeste McMickle. She is the Director of Client Solutions for Zero Waste Certification with the USGBC, which she'll talk a little bit about during this session. She is a trained architect and has a background as a sustainability consultant, lead green rater, and waste expert. She has previously worked with Stephen Winter Associates, DSNY, and the New York City Compost Project. And she is the vice chair, of the Brooklyn Solid Waste Advisory Board, and is a certified master composter. Love it. Awesome background. So Celeste will be leading our discussion today on the hierarchy, or zero waste, the hierarchy, upstream solutions, and the true advisor certification. So please welcome Celeste.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen, so bear with me for 1 second while I get that up. All right, there we go. Can everyone see that okay? Great, okay. Well, thanks again to Bridget and the team at Johns Hopkins. It's awesome that you guys are doing this. This is such a fun way to come together and talk about this stuff. It's a big passion of mine, so I'm glad to share it with all of you. So, great introduction. Again, my name is Celeste. I'm with the USGBC. Many of you are probably familiar with us, specifically with LEED certification and the other building certifications and sustainability certifications that we've developed with USGBC and GBCI. What you might not be as familiar with is in addition to LEED, we have a number of other sustainability related certifications that address different facets of the industry. And of course, today we're going to be focusing on TRUE. So TRUE stands for Total Resource Use and Efficiency, and it is our zero waste certification program for facilities. Before we jump too much into TRUE though, I do want to just provide a little context. I think probably many of us on the webinar are pretty up to date with issues related to resource management and the recycling and trash industry, but just to provide a little bit of context, as you can see from this graph and just in general, that we're kind of at a little bit of a tipping point in the waste industry, right? We're struggling with issues related to ocean plastics, single-use plastics. We're continuing to send more and more material to recycling, but not all of that material is being properly recycled, and in turn that's not really having an impact on our landfill. Our landfills are continuing to also gain in material weight. So this is a big issue. Materials that are sent to landfill produce methane, which is a really big greenhouse gas. It also creates pollution and all these issues. So where we're at, I would say right now, is that we need to start looking at these solutions that go beyond just recycling. Although recycling is great, it's not the only thing that's available to us, right? And some of these issues come down to the fact that we're very used to living in this idea of this throwaway society. I mean, I think especially with all the issues that are happening right now related to the COVID pandemic, there's a lot of takeout, there's a lot of PPE, gloves and masks and things, and it's very important and safety has to come first, but there's also a lot of challenges that's come with that. And it's really thrown a lot of the recycling industry into some challenges. And the reality is that those challenges existed before, but they very much exist now too. So I think that, you know, there's a lot of awareness surrounding these issues, but, you know, we don't always have great solutions. So what I'm hoping to do today is to provide some solutions for individuals and companies and corporations on how to get there. So, you know, I think there's a lot of drive for that individual action. And I think that individual action is really important. And it's something that we can all do. I think waste is cool in a way because it's something that we all participate in, right? Like we all interact with it on a daily basis. Most of us, unless we're very fancy zero wasters, are going to have trash and recycling bins at our homes where we live, at our offices, when we go to our offices. So there is a lot of individual action that we can take, which is great. But at the same time, I think there's also a pretty high importance on organizations and facilities, corporations taking a stand and making a difference. And I think that comes from a consumer perspective. That's something that we're demanding now of companies as consumers. And it's also something that corporations are seeing that they need to have more of a leadership role in. One big reason for this that as a consumer we're not always aware of is this issue of how much material and waste is actually generated in the process of making a product that comes to you. So, you know, when you get the actual water bottle or whatever it is, you might not be aware of how much waste was created in that process. So I think that that again is why, you know, companies being able to have an impact on that makes a really big difference. And the USGBC and GBCI, that's always been a position that we've taken. When we go back, you know, 20, 30 years to the establishment of the LEED program, that was always something that was sort of a tenet in the philosophy that a lot of people were talking about green building and energy efficiency, but there weren't necessarily clear paths for how to get there. And that was how LEED was developed, to create that pathway and that verification that what companies said they were doing was actually happening. So when we talk about waste, I think, you know, that's been a little bit of a slower environmental issue to evolve. And so we're kind of in the waste world, we're kind of at the place that maybe energy efficiency was a couple decades ago. So we're in a same situation where a lot of people are talking about zero waste. A lot of people are interested in this idea of reducing their waste, but there aren't necessarily clear strategies for how to get there. So tying into that, you know, when we're throwing out this idea of zero waste, you know, it's trending. People, I just referred to people as being a zero waster. You know, it's as a lifestyle, as something that a company wants to put out into the world, that they're a zero waste company. You know, what does that really mean, and how do you really get there? And so one of the things we're going to talk about today is you know, kind of how True creates a pathway for that process and for that success story. But before we get too much into True certification, I do want to talk a little bit more about some of the principles and concepts behind zero waste. So I'll start with this zero waste hierarchy of highest and best use. So some of you may have seen this before, this little upside down triangle that, you know, is kind of like the food pyramid, but the other way. And what this is really trying to identify is the different levels of integrity that a product can achieve throughout its life cycle. Being the higher the integrity, the higher of the triangle it's going to be. So things like redesign, reduction, returnability, reuse, repair, and remanufacture. Those are all things that we refer to in these top two tiers as upstream solutions. So those are all ways that these materials can continue their highest and best use for as long as possible. These upstream solutions are things that happen before diversion. Diversion meaning things like recycling, composting, landfill, incineration, and the environment. The bottom two tiers here are called downstream solutions, and they really fall again into that diversion category, which is going to be, you know, sending materials off-site typically to be remanufactured into other goods. Again, I want to be really clear. I think recycling is important. I think it's great. But, you know, when I was growing up, when I was in school, we always talked about the 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. And I think what we've seen a lot recently is that there's been a huge focus on recycling. And when we talk about like diversion rates, and when we talk about waste management plans, it often fully relies on recycling as the only R. I think that has a lot to do with that convenience factor that we were talking about a little bit before with that throwaway society, that people are just very used to kind of like consuming materials and then sending them away to be dealt with by someone else. And that's okay. That's an important part of the process. But when we're talking about overall zero waste strategies, I think it's important to realize that there's other choices that can be made that are going to have a higher environmental impact and allow that product to stay in its useful life for longer. So an example of that could be something really simple, like the choice between recycling a single-use water bottle, or Leanna had a reusable cup that was returned to her doorstep before we got on this call that they had left at a house. Calling you out. and that's great, right? Because if you have one of those reusable cups, you can keep using that over and over and over again, and it can stay in its highest and best use for the life of the product versus just being used once and then recycled and typically downcycled into something that's going to be of a less quality material. So we can talk a little bit more about those definitions if there's questions on them and things like that. But you know, to kind of wrap up this slide, I just kind of want to convey that this is really a big way that our program has looked at zero waste and how we can provide tools to companies that are interested in pursuing zero waste. That we really want to change the conversation from just being about recycling and those more downstream choices to being upstream. And the one more thing I'll say about that is because there's a lot more actual individual control that corporations and individuals can have when it's an upstream solution. You know, when you send something to the recycling, you're not always aware of what's going to happen with that material once it leaves your space. Hopefully it goes to a recycling center and turns into another product, but that's not always the case. And especially on a regional basis, there's a lot of differences in what can and can't be recycled. Sometimes there's confusion surrounding that. So the more you as an individual and as a company, corporation, facility, focus on these upstream solutions, the more empowered you're going to be to actually know that these choices that you're making are going to make a difference. Okay, a little bit more on that is this idea of a waste audit versus a zero waste audit. Again, kind of getting into those principles behind zero waste. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the idea of a waste audit, but the difference between that and a zero waste audit is with a waste audit, you're kind of looking at all the materials you have in, in a space, and you're identifying where they need to go. Right? Is there contamination in the trash bin? Something should be in recycling. Is there contamination in the compost bin? Something should actually be in landfill. With a zero waste audit, the idea is you're actually analyzing whether or not those materials should be there in the first place. So you're actually trying to ideally eliminate all those bins from being needed in the first place. Now that's obviously going to be a very high level achievement to get to the point where you don't need any collection bins, but that's the goal. So when you're doing that audit, if it's a zero waste audit, instead of just identifying that all of your, again, using that plastic water bottle analogy, when you're making sure that all your plastic water bottles are ending up in the recycling bin, what you're doing with the zero waste audit is you're actually saying, no, why do we have all these plastic water bottles to begin with? Is there a choice that we can make that can eliminate them from needing to be here in the first place? Okay, so a little bit about TRUE. TRUE is a zero waste certification program which aims to transform the way businesses manage resources and drives the transition towards a circular economy. And our goal is that all of our certified projects are going to divert all their solid waste. Now, our criteria for certification is 90%, but our goal, of course, is that projects will go above and beyond that to get to 95, 99, 100%. But what we do is we take this idea of that zero waste hierarchy and we've turned it into a points-based rating system that can actually be used to make choices that are going to guide projects towards that zero waste performance. So a lot of that comes from looking at internal processes and procedures when it comes to operations to how you can actually redesign the way your business works to be able to focus on these upstream choices. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. An example we have is Toyota, which is not certified, but they have been working with our program. And what they did was really a very effective way of describing this move from a recycling program to an upstream program. So they had a shipping program, a cardboard shipping program where, they'd box things up in cardboard, they'd send it out, that cardboard would get recycled. Great, pretty typical, right? When they started working with TRUE and looking at the idea of reduction and reuse and things like that, they realized that they could redesign their shipping process by using a returnable shipping container program. And making that one choice, they were able to eliminate all of the cardboard that they were using in this process. Also, by doing that, they were able to save over $1 billion on their shipping packaging costs, which is incredible. And so that's really what I mean about that power that comes from moving from a downstream decision to an upstream decision, right? Because when they were sending all that material all that cardboard material to recycling, they still had to pay for the hauler. There's still a lot of embedded carbon involved in the processing and recycling of that cardboard to turn it into something else and then to receive new cardboard. But when they have a returnable shipping container, they're making an operational choice that's going to have a long-term impact on both the environment and their savings. So I think it's a really powerful example of what we're talking about here. And we have lots more examples from our other projects that we've worked on. This is just one of them. But hopefully it really effectively demonstrates that. So that's a big way that TRUE is going to help support the organization. We're really here to help your project not only be a leader in that environmental performance and really show that verification behind zero waste choices, but it also has a huge impact on your bottom line. And again, that's because, when you're throwing materials away, there's always going to be a cost associated with that. So we really want to help our facilities eliminate the need to have those bins altogether. And that really can only be done when you're working with those upstream solutions. We are a points-based rating system, very similar to what you might be used to with LEAD, if that's a familiar program to you. We have 4 different tiers: certified, silver, gold, and platinum, with different point thresholds that line up with each certification level. This is an overview of our categories and points. I'm not going to spend too much time, just to be mindful of making sure we have time for Q&A. I'm not going to spend too much time going over this, but I will just highlight a few things on here, which is, first of all, on the left, on the top, I want to just draw your eye to redesign, reduce, and reuse. So we've dedicated a pretty big section of the rating system to really focusing on these upstream solutions. And overall, what we've really tried to create is a program that addresses all the different facets of sustainability, right? Especially when it comes to waste. We're not just looking at recycling. We do have a recycling section, but you'll notice that it's only 3 points. And again, that's really because so many of our projects already focus so much on recycling as their diversion strategy that we really want to move that focus to other places that can be more powerful. In the bottom left, a good example of that is zero waste purchasing. And that's actually the section where we've allocated the most number of points. And that's because, again, there's so much power that comes from those purchasing decisions, you know, where you have that plastic water bottle that's being offered to staff in the break room. And then you get involved with your purchasing team and say, hey, we actually want to switch away from that. Maybe we want to put in a Brita filter and make sure that, you know, people just know that they have access to clean water and reusable cups. And that's a great example of what that purchasing could look like. And that's going to have a huge impact. Also on the right hand, top right, you'll see leadership and training. We've also allocated a decent number of points to these sections as well. We really feel like zero waste is one of those like team sports. It really works the most successfully when you have everybody on board, be it from the very top level leadership to, you know, like a part-time unpaid intern. Like, everyone is important, and if someone isn't participating, if someone isn't understanding, it is going to have an impact. And so we just really want this program to reflect all the different ways that an organization can make choices that are really going to help guide towards that goal of zero waste. And it's meant to be like a journey to get there. We have projects that are going to come to us. Actually, let me switch to the next slide. I know this is hard to see. I'll get into it in a minute. But, you know, we have projects that come to us that say, oh, hey, we're only at 30% diversion. I don't think there's any way that we're going to be able to get up to that threshold of 90%. And I think one of our ways of always working with them is saying, okay, but are you only looking at your recycling bin, right? I'm located here in New York City, and 30% is actually like a pretty decent recycling rate for this area. And so if a project comes to us and says that they're at 30% diversion, that's not atypical. And so what we'll say is we'll encourage them to go through the program and use that as a roadmap to address all these different categories and credits for how they can use those different steps to get them to zero waste. Okay, and what this is that you're looking at right now is a diversion tracking document. And I apologize, I know it's small. I will send around a better copy afterwards so that you can look at it in a little bit more detail. But what I want to draw your eye to is, you know, what's highlighted here is on the top left, it's diversion calculations. And oftentimes that's where you'll see, you know, recycling rate, landfill rate, maybe composting if you're composting. But what we also include in this, and which is listed below that, is zero waste diversion calculator. And so we include those choices like reduction, like reuse, like redesign. All of those different elements are going to also go into your diversion calculator. So if a project comes to us and says that they're only at 30%, what I say is, okay, but let's actually look at what you're including in that diversion number, and are there other things that you're doing that aren't included that are related to things that you've done to reduce? And that's where that upside down zero waste hierarchy comes in, because those are the choices that we really want to guide our facilities, our projects, our clients to make. We really want them to focus on those upstream choices, and they actually get reflected within the diversion calculator. And that's that power of True, is that we actually give that credit for those upstream choices. It's not just lost in, you know, in a non-diversion calculator. It actually gets incorporated in there, and projects get rewarded for that effort. All different kinds of projects are eligible for true certification. We do certify a facility specifically. So we might have companies that have certified, a number of different facilities, but we would always be working with the facility. The company itself wouldn't get certified. Typically, it would be the facility itself. But that said, we've got all types of projects coming in. I know there's a lot of folks from higher education here. We do have a number of higher education facilities that have either gotten certified or are registered to go through the process, which is really exciting. I think it's a great opportunity for higher education. And so I'd definitely be very happy to talk a little bit more in depth about that in the Q&A. We also have commercial buildings. We have some hospitality, museums, hotels, casinos, restaurants, a lot of different kinds of projects that have come through the pipeline. We have some wineries and breweries, which is really cool. A lot of variety in the different types of facilities. And it's really meant to encompass all of those. So there's no like one pathway for, for one type of building. It's really meant to be inclusive of a lot of different project types. We're about just shy of 200 certifications at this point. We are global. So, when I was mentioning some of our clients that, might have multiple facilities certified, we do have, for a good example would be Colgate-Palmolive. They're a big client of ours, and they've certified facilities all over the world at this point, which is really amazing. So we're really excited about those projects because it just shows how much of an impact that you can actually make. Colgate has facilities that are certified in Vietnam, in South America, and it really shows that, even though those might be places that are lacking to some degree in recycling infrastructure, because they're focusing on those upstream choices, they can still get to that point of achieving zero waste. And in that way, they don't actually even really need to worry about what that recycling infrastructure might be, because they're not even creating the waste in the first place. And that's really, to me, super, super powerful. So the other thing I wanted to share with you is that we also have a professional certificate called the True Advisor, which is similar to the Lead AP, which some of you may be familiar with, but of course it focuses on True. The other difference is that it's a online on-demand module program. And so it's actually a training program as well as a certificate. So if you sign up for the True Advisor, you're given access to these modules. It goes through zero waste concepts and principles, way more in depth than I did today. But then you also learn, more of the ins and outs of True, gives you more tools about, how to do a zero waste audit or a diversion calculator, lots of good stuff. And then at the end of the module, there's an exam. And if you pass the exam, then you earn the credential. We're just shy of 1,000 True Advisors now, also a global program. So, when I showed that slide with our facilities, a lot of those facilities may have True Advisors that have gone through the program so that they could help support the facility as they're going through. So that, kind of accounts for some of the global nature of this. But we also have a lot of students that have gone through, consultants that go through. There's really no one targeted type of individual that would be a True Advisor. We really see a pretty broad spectrum in there. People that work in the recycling and hauler industry, all kinds of different individuals. It's actually how I got involved with True as well. I was doing consulting, and I thought it would be a great offering for my clients. And so I went through and thought, oh man, this is a really cool program. And then luckily was able to start working with them. So it's been a really fun journey, but I do really recommend the True Advisor. These are True Advisors in action. They do become a really big part of the process. Again, with the idea of zero waste being this like team sport, it really involves all different employees and all players, and having a True Advisor involved either on an internal basis or from an external coming in as a consultant or whatever it might be. I think it's really great. So that's a little bit about us. Again, we're really just working to help transform the industry into one that goes beyond this idea of recycling and really is inclusive of these other strategies, really taking back those 3 R's and just doing what we can to reduce waste. So I'm happy to discuss more and answer any questions you might have.
There we go. was like, wait a second, I gotta unmute myself. Well, thank you so much, Celeste, for that really great and quick overview of True. And
it's a lot of information, I know.
yeah, but it's great. I think I really loved, I feel like I kept nodding my head the entire time you did your presentation. Your upside down pyramid, because that's something that we talk about so much, is that so much emphasis is on the recycling part. And Leanne and I recently had our titles changed to talk about reduction as well as recycling.
Yeah.
It's such an important component when talking about waste in general. So I do want to ask, I saw some people have been adding some things into the chat, and I'm going to let Leanna, you bring in some of those. But real quick, I'm just curious, and it was a question that you had mentioned before, but what do you think is the most impactful thing, and this might be really difficult to answer, that an organization can do to forward their zero waste step?
No, I think it's a good question. And I think actually probably starting with that audit is a really good place to start, Yeah, if you're interested in sort of analyzing, even on an individual level, that's even what I say when someone is like, what's the first step I can take to reducing my own waste? I think understanding what your waste is, you have to know that. You have to have that information first. If you don't know what you have and what you're creating and what you're wasting, you're never going to be able to solve it. So I think if you start there, that's the best place that you can. And then, if this particularly is interesting to you, then I think the True Advisor is also a really good place to start, because it provides a lot of context and education on understanding zero waste. And so I think that's also a really helpful resource.
And I can vouch for the program as well. I took it last summer, and as part of my training at Hopkins, and we are supported and encouraged to do trainings, and that was one of the trainings that I did last year, and it was great. It was really, really, really great.
Yeah, I just also want to mention that I think, there's so many things that you've said in your presentation that harken back to not only what Bridget and I really promote through our program in the past that we always have, but most recently, we've been doing these Waste Less Wednesdays and a number of other virtual engagement activities. And last week we had an event in the evening, and it was called Zero Waste is Overwhelming, Less Waste is Not.
Ooh,
and
yeah, I saw that actually. It's great.
And I think that, one of the points that we wanted to make was that, and you kind of, having companies take the responsibility for themselves is really critical, because, as individuals, we can feel that there is only so much we can do, or we feel guilty when we don't do everything we possibly can do. I mean, life is tough, and there's only so many hours you can dedicate to washing reusable diapers or researching the best reusable, swap or replacement for something that you feel guilty about. And so having the onus not be on the individual, but have it be on the corporation or the business to take responsibility is really critical. So organizations like yours kind of really, are important. How would an organization use this to their advantage? I mean, are there a lot of companies that are focusing primarily on the PR or on the money saving, or just as part of their inherent mission?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I mean, I think companies come to us for all kinds of reasons, but I think all of those are certainly important aspects. A lot of organizations and corporations have very robust sustainability plans. And I think sometimes as consumers, we can get a little down on corporations and think like, oh, they're not doing anything. But the reality is that they actually have very, very high targets that they're trying to hit, but they need steps on how to get there. And they don't necessarily always know what those steps are. And so having tools that they can use is a great resource. So I think that's a really big reason, is that we have a resource. I think one of the other cool things about True that I touched on is that there are actually like built-in efficiencies. And sometimes when you're looking at other types of sustainability upgrades, like big energy or water investments, there's a lot of big costs that go into implementing those from the very beginning. But with programs like this that are focused on resource management, it really isn't like that. You know, you're more looking at your organization for how you can like reduce costs rather than add costs. And so I think that it actually makes a lot of sense, especially right now with everything that's happening related to the COVID and pandemic and economy. You know, I think it's actually an opportunity to really like pare down and be more efficient about like what an organization is spending money on. Yeah.
That's a great segue to our question from Lindsay. She asks, or he, once the COVID-19 pandemic has settled down, do you think it will be difficult for us to get back to where we were before the pandemic in terms of zero waste efforts? I am really worried about people's perceptions on reusing items might be affected.
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's such an important one too. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about that throughout these whole couple of months here. I am really optimistic. I'm an optimistic person, so I'll put that out there. But I do think that there is really the potential that this has raised a lot of awareness about these issues, and that momentum is going to drive things in the future. I think this has created a lot of conversations between the plastics industry and sort of like the non-single-use plastics advocates about what is and isn't safe. A couple of great resources are Upstream Solutions. It's a nonprofit like us, and they have created a great document that references health experts that have attested to the fact that reuse is, you know, totally safe, and that it's completely fine. And I think that there's a lot of conversation out there about what that's going to do to drive things forward. It's been really hard to see a lot of like recycling rollbacks, and like where I'm located in New York City, like our compost program was rolled back. But I really do think that these are temporary, and I actually think that this has created more momentum to talk about these things in the future, and that there's only going to be more of it. So I wouldn't despair too much. I think it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I think you know, in Baltimore, we just had our recycling services return after 3 weeks, and our trash services were disrupted. Particularly on the east side of town, because there was a huge outbreak in one of the sanitation yards.
Right.
And it just makes you think, like, I mean, I had the benefit of being able to take my recycling up to campus. Not everybody had that. Yeah. But, you know, the trash didn't even affect me because I generate so little of it. And it just makes you think that, like, that reducing from the start has so many ramifications. I mean, like, these poor individuals that are feel they're essential, but the pressure to go to work, the pressure on the department heads to keep services going, is directly related to the amount of waste that we generate. Again, exactly. You know, not necessarily always an individual choice that we can make to avoid, but it does make the connection between our purchasing and our consumption and the greater essential services that we depend on, and how reducing our waste can have huge ramifications across the board.
Yep, so. I totally agree, and I think that that's something that we talk a lot about here at True, is that, you know, one of the ways that we sort of encourage that like social and environmental justice is creating a program that like takes away the problem. You know, we're literally trying to remove that problem from existing in the first place, and that is a great way to support janitorial staff. That's a great way to support essential workers, is just by making their job easier and safer and cleaner. So yeah, I think like not creating it in the first place is one of the best things that you can do. And I think that has raised a lot of awareness during this COVID time for exactly those reasons. You know, I think where I am here in New York, again, with that composting issue, I mean, so many people that weren't even aware of like how much they enjoyed the composting program, and now that they have to put the food scraps back in their waste bin, they're like, oh my gosh, it smells so bad, I didn't even realize. And it's like, that's a really cool lesson. I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to learn that lesson, that resource was taken away, but it's great for people to have that awareness. I think it's really important.
Kind of in line with talking about the effect that COVID is having on the waste industry, do you, I don't know, internally in USGBC, have they talked at all about how organizations are dealing with PPE issues, or like waste that is COVID related waste that we now kind of all have, that can't easily be diverted.
Right. Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. I guess two things about that. One really good resource for people if they're not aware of it is that TerraCycle has a really good like glove and mask recycling program. So if that's something that you're looking for, opportunities for how to recycle those materials, that's a good one to look to. Internally for True, we've developed some protocols and language surrounding with how we're supporting our facilities that are going through this process, because of course, certain facilities that had really high diversion numbers have had to include more PPE. And so we're really trying to work with those facilities on an individual basis to figure out, how we can support them, what credits have been impacted by them, kind of handling things more on like a case-by-case basis to see what we can do. But certainly it's something that we've looked at, and we've also implemented a few very specific health and safety credits that are now pilots that can be accessed for projects that are also registered. So we really are trying to figure out different ways that we can support our clients, because we know that this has had a really big impact on them. And of course, it has to, and the safety and health has to come first. 100%, it can't just be compromised. It can't be compromised. But I think that there's ways that we can help support those facilities and those projects as they're working through it.
Touche. No, I appreciate you mentioning the TerraCycle, because I always forget about that. I know a lot of times people, especially now, one of the things, as getting back to your upside down pyramid reduce, have been using reusable masks and things like that. So there are avenues, there are options, but in certain situations, that's a great point.
I just want to remind everyone that they should feel free to unmute themselves and ask any questions on their own. A lot of people are kind of having some fun discussions on the chat about some shoes that I probably need to check out. Suave. I've also heard of, is it Roxy? And there's also a bird one, I think.
Allbirds.
Allbirds, yeah.
Allbirds,
and they are made from recycled material. And I don't know if does anybody know of any shoe companies that actually take back their worn shoes for reuse? No? All right. And then yeah.
Get rid of.
And then again, there's some more discussion on the chat. It's just sort of reinforcing the importance of the interconnectedness between racial justice and environmental justice, and the disproportionate impact that communities of color have when it comes to both the generation of pollution, the waste and pollution that's generated in the production and manufacturing of materials, and then on the disposal side. So we have an incinerator here in Baltimore, and that certainly has some environmental and public health impacts. And there was a study that we pointed to, Bridget, last year when we did our environmental justice theme for Earth Day, that showed and I can't remember exactly, but it was something along the lines of, 25% of the consumption is done by people of color, but they then disproportionately are impacted by the environmental consequences, whether it be pollution, climate change, et cetera. Like the majority is impacted by those communities. So I think that, the discussion that we're having globally, nationally right now, and in the chat is really important to continue beyond these, historic moments that we're going through right now with the reckoning of our country's history. So keep it coming.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. I really am on board with that, and I think it's been really hard to see all of these statistics coming out related to a lot of these environmental justice communities. And, it's a big problem with incinerators, and it's a big reason why incineration does not qualify as part of True. There's just so many impacts related to air quality, social justice issues. I mean, it's really, it's a big problem. And so I think as much as we can be aware of what those impacts are, and work to make it more equitable, work on that distribution more, but also just, you know, fight to have those not be so heavily impacted, I think is incredibly important.
To that point, I'm just curious, you know, I took the training, but I don't know how when organizations do the certification process, do you rate incinerator or landfill differently?
No, they're the same. They're on equal footing. Yeah, and they do not count towards the diversion number. So incineration, waste to energy, landfill, pollution to the environment, those are all outside the scope of what we allow in the program. Yeah.
Good to know. Cool.
Curious. So as we talk about, we talked about zero waste in our previous engagements, and how sometimes it's seen as more of a luxury or a privileged lifestyle, if you will. And then again, I think on the similar vein, corporations and companies and institutions like Hopkins may think that taking those steps would actually increase cost. And so for individuals to feel like, you know, to buy, I mean, I do not own a pair of Roxy's because I can't afford those shoes. And I have I was in a car accident when I was younger, so my shoes wear out really quickly, which is why I'm always trying to find places that'll take shoes back. So, you know, but for me, that's not an option, you know, to spend that kind of money on a pair of reusable or recycled, you know, content shoes. Similarly, where a company might feel like they don't have the money to invest to take those steps. Can you just speak a little bit to that point?
Sure.
About whether, you know, zero waste is achievable at all economic levels, whether it be individual or, you know, corporate business?
Sure.
Small business. You have a lot of small businesses that, you know, may be able to attain true.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that it's funny to me actually when people consider like zero wasters consider it to be sort of like an elite lifestyle, because it's an efficient lifestyle. You know, it's that's what it is inherently. It's a more resource efficient lifestyle, which is inherently going to be less expensive. You know, it's the idea of, instead of buying rags at the store to clean, you're using old worn out clothes to use as rags to clean. You know, like you don't need to buy these new materials. It's saying, instead of, you know, like buying these new products, you're finding ways to work around that and to find solutions in your own home or in your office or whatever it might be to not have to consume these new resources. And when you're not consuming new resources, you're not spending money, you know? So, and also a lot of times, like, it might involve buying more in bulk or some of these other things that often do actually save money, you know, instead of buying a coffee every morning. I mean, sure, maybe you're taking a reusable coffee cup to the store, but maybe now that because of COVID, your lifestyle has changed a little bit, so you're making your coffee at home every day instead. You know, it's like, I think these are very efficient financial and resource management decisions that are made. And I would say the same thing when it comes to companies. You know, I think some of the examples that I gave and some of the things we've talked about, it's like sure, there might be to some degree an output of costs when some of the changes are happening on an organizational structure. Like, let's say you have to invest in reusable coffee cups instead of, you know, providing disposable coffee cups. Maybe the first time you do that, it's a little bit more expensive. But in the long run, you're no longer every month purchasing those coffee cups because you have a reusable model. So I think, you know, really just reframing the conversation. It doesn't have to sound like this elite, fancy, unattainable idea. It's smart, you know, it's efficient on every level. And I think that for some reason that gets penalized in a way, you know, or maybe like we as Americans, especially, I'm speaking to, you know, we've gotten so focused on this idea of consumption and consuming more, and kind of having like some societal swag associated with that, that it seems like when we're making these more efficient choices, like there's some negative side to it. But I just, you know, I couldn't disagree more. I think that it's fantastic. And I think that now that maybe we're looking at it more from an environmental lens, I think it's really important. And I also think that companies are going to start to be required to make these choices a little bit more. I mean, I think we're just seeing more and more of this legislature coming out. There's a big bill that's going through Congress right now called the Break Free from Plastic Act, which is a really important one and really critical. And I think, you know, a lot of what we see from that also related to something called EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, which basically means that corporations have to be part of the take back program for the materials that they're putting out in the world. I mean, all of these things are going to help move corporations and push corporations into making these more environmentally conscious decisions. But the thing is they're more resource conscious too. So it's kind of a win for everybody. And so it's kind of funny to me when, not you guys, but it's kind of funny to me when people think that it's like this elite idea or this unachievable thing, because to me, it's like, that's how I grew up, you know, that's how my family was when I was younger. And I just think it's something that I hope we start to see more of.
Yeah.
I have been just clicking on a lot of the links that are in the chat box. Thank you for sharing something about Shoe Drive and
Yes.
and the Break Free from Plastics Act. I think is something also that we've mentioned. So everyone try to keep an eye out if there are any opportunities to contact your local legislator to support some of these federal legislation. It's really important. And locally, you know, like bottle bills and things that repeatedly get industry pushback that, you know, are, oh, sorry.
I'm missing out on this chat. I'm glad I'm getting like
No,
the
there's
highlights
a lot
here.
going
There's
on
like
in
a
the
lot of
chat.
action in there.
That was the subcommittee of that the link that somebody just shared that I did not think was going to start on its own, but it did. I wanted to click on them and have them open so that when we close the event down, I can still have access to them.
Yeah.
So I apologize for that. But anyway, just sort of talking about some of the industry pushback on some, you know, local and federal legislation that really will help move us forward from a strategic and upstream standpoint.
Yep. And we need that. It needs to happen. I think that what you were saying earlier, Leanna, about the onus being on consumers versus corporations. I mean, I think that's huge. And I think it's really hard to put it on the consumer because we do, if you're a conscious consumer, you do have that guilt, or you do have those like trade-offs that you're making about time and energy and money and things like that. But really, you know, we need different options so that we're not in that position. You know, the only option that we're given shouldn't be to have an expensive, wasteful lifestyle, you know. And I think some of the models that have come out with things like TerraCycle, like they have their Loop program, which is fantastic. And some of these more like refill stores and like bulk stores that we see popping up are fantastic, but there needs to be a more economical model for that. And I think corporations really need to drive some of those opportunities. And I think that they will be required to. And I think the market will show that it's actually going to be a good investment for them too, because it is what people want also. You know, it's interesting, you know, there's this idea that when you buy something from the store, like you don't want the bottle, right? Like if you buy a jar of mayonnaise, you don't want the jar, you want the mayonnaise inside. You're just stuck with the jar. The jar is like a problem that you then have to deal with, right? So from a consumer level, it's like, it's actually, I think, in the best interest of these corporations to really think about what they're offering to their consumers and giving us, you know, what we actually want. And I think, you know, a milkman model, a reusable model like that works really well. But the reality is most people, maybe not with mayonnaise, but like with beans and things like that, you'll take it out of the bag that you bought it in. And most people, I think it's like 75% of consumers or something like that will put that material in a different jar. And just because you're trying to get rid of the thing that you had to buy it in. So really thinking about that as an inefficiency and how do we like remove that inefficiency and just remove that waste, I think is really interesting. And I'm excited to see where we go with that.
Lindsay has another question. What guidance do you have for education settings where budgets for different aspects are divided up in different places? For example, purchasing savings aren't seen in facilities where you are buying more bins or paying compost contamination fees. So for example, like for us at Hopkins, departments on their own pay for all of their own supplies, but our department pays for, you know, I mean, there's a tiny fee in their space allocation rate where they they pay for our budget. But in general, you know, an increase in people purchasing things does not mean an increase in our budget.
Mhm.
So, you know, how do you recommend that, you know, institutions or organizations sort of match those inequities or
Yeah,
differences?
no, that's a challenge for sure. I can definitely see how that could potentially pose a challenge. I guess what I would say, I hope this helps, is that, you know, as far as true certification is concerned, again, because we do it like by facility, it could be like what we've seen for a higher education model in the past is that we had the Haas School of Business at Berkeley College. Like they were a specific facility within a larger organization. And it's not like they had, you know, the entire campus certified, although they're moving in that direction, but they wanted to test it out at one individual facility. And so they were able to sort of manage like what resources were coming in and out of that one building and analyze how they could make a change on that scale, as kind of like a test model for what they could do for a larger campus. And so I think, you know, it could be tricky for a program that, you know, has its fingers in different pots in different facilities. But I think if you're able to kind of like break it down on a more individual level, then, you know, starting small is a great place to start and seeing what individual choices a facility or department could make without needing, you know, it to be this like blanket campus-wide choice.
Is it Jia Chang? Is not a dumb question.
No, I was like writing back to it right now.
Can worn clothes be recycled?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's a really good question. And it kind of speaks to a bigger issue of like some of the challenges that we run into with regional recycling abilities, because every place is going to be different. And so I think no matter where you are, there's always going to be like take back places at like Salvation Armies or pickup locations where you can, you know, like drop off worn clothes, shoes, blankets, pillows, things like that, like take back programs for linens. I would just look at what's available in your area. Here in New York, the Department of Sanitation actually has a take back program, but it's not like something you put out on curbside. You have to bring it to a specific location, or on a certain day they'll have a pickup for it. The same is true as like for most places with like electronics and more specialty measures. There's usually going to be places in the area that have take back programs, but it's not going to be like the same region to region. It's going to be really specific to what your sanitation department or what collection programs are available to you. And if nothing else, there's going to be nonprofits in the area that are able to take those.
And I would just caution, we did one of our first virtual event that we did when we were all brought back home was a watch party, and it was all about fast fashion. And there's the Patriot Act, which is available on Netflix, has an episode on it. And just to caution people about some of the unknowns with donation for Goodwill and Salvation Army, and the really tiny percentage of clothing that actually does get purchasaced and stays within the local economy, and how much is shockingly disposed of outside of our borders in developing countries, and the greenwashing that some corporations will partake in, like bring us your clothes and we'll give you a 10% coupon for more clothing purchases, that actually they're just dumping those clothes somewhere else too. So you know, it's very important to, like, you know, maybe think about, are there direct organizations like, you know, Dress for Success or other kinds of groups or swaps where you know that whatever you're giving away is going to a person and maybe not a large unknown somewhere else. And I would like to also thank Susie from True, who's been answering some of these questions
in the chat. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. I've been seeing some of those pop up through without reading them super carefully.
Just Celeste's little shadow today.
Yeah, Susie's the best. Susie's
Thank you all.
She's we're on the same team, and yeah, and if you guys have questions following this, I mean, either of us are great to reach out to. I'm located in the New York area, and Susie is in DC, which is where our headquarters is. So I know there's probably a lot of folks here, it looked like, from the Mid-Atlantic region, from the South, from the Northeast. But yeah, we've got, regional representation. So we're definitely happy to continue the conversation, with you beyond today.
Cool. Well, we are well past our time. So thank you all for coming with us today along. I'm going to put out our closing polls real quick. If you could take a quick look at those before you guys log off. But thank you all for hanging out with us this afternoon, evening. Very insightful, Celeste, a great overview. I think I learned a lot. I think a lot of people learned a lot about True and just talking about zero waste in general. Great, awesome presentation, and it was nice to chat with everybody about everything.
Yeah, it was great. I'm so glad. Thank you for having me. This was really lovely, and I'm glad most people enjoyed the presentation. That would have been a bummer if poll number 1 had come back with different results. So,
no, great. So again, please join us next week. We had one of our co-hosts not be able to attend next week, so it'll be just Leanna and I and all of you. So
just us,
sorry. And our topic will be food waste. And so we'll be talking about all sorts of things, not specifically compost. So if you're interested in compost, still come, but in another week or so, we'll be talking about compost in depth. Next week, just food waste. So again, with that, have a great rest of your week. We will be sharing resources from today's event in the email that'll be coming out on Friday. So if you have questions or you want to get Celeste's presentation, or you have questions about how you can learn more, you'll get all of that great information on Friday. All right, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
thanks, guys. Take care.
thanks
Thanks,
Celeste.
guys.